The ACC recently had their opportunity to fire back at Florida State in the North Carolina courts. Well, FSU has just done the same in Florida.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On this episode, we will talk about 4 ACC players who were just drafted into the NBA's first round last night and who may have been left off and why. We are going to talk about, this is pretty cool, for the upcoming football season, 24/7 Sports ranked their top 10 non-conference games involving ACC teams. Did they get it right? But Kenton, as we often do these days, we start in the courtroom because there's so much going on between Florida State and the ACC right now. You have appeals going on, North Carolina Supreme Court, the first court of appeals in Florida. There's also something in process there. And Florida State has responded to the ACC's appeal in Florida. So this is a quick recap here from the Tallahassee Democrat. The ACC filed an appeal June 5th, earlier this month, challenging the rulings made by Leon County Circuit Judge John C. Cooper back in April, specifically on his decision to deny the motion to stay or pause the case based on what he believed was the ACC participating in forum shopping, where they filed that anticipatory lawsuit in North Carolina. So here's a couple of quotes from Florida State's response, Kenton. In the response to the appeal, FSU argued that Cooper was within his right to rule in favor of the Seminoles, arguing the principle of priority, also known as first in time, first in right, should not influence this lawsuit because of extraordinary circumstances, such as the anticipatory filing of the ACC's motion. Quote, the ACC's baseless argument, they called it, shows only that the trial court addressed the unique factors or circumstances of this litigation, and nothing in Florida law shows that it was an error, much less a departure from the essential requirements established by Florida law to do so. By the way, he's Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. So Kenton, Florida State very strongly agrees with Judge Cooper in Florida that the ACC was up to some forum shopping shenanigans.
Oh, absolutely. The first in time, first in right concept is one that we've discussed ad nauseum on this show, right? We're getting basically the situation of, we know why the lawsuits were filed by the ACC first when there were going to be lawsuits handed down to them. We get it. We understand it. The interesting thing is what Florida State is saying is what we've been saying all along. Hey, they tried to get their lawsuit out first so that they could be first in line. They wanted to set precedents with their case in North Carolina, which we believe will be a friendlier court to them. And we want to do it here in Leon County, which we believe will be more friendly to us. That's literally what we're saying, just with a lot of legalese here, right? It's the difference between saying, and such and so has got a weird case, why is he around? Or saying such and so has some very odd legal proceedings, the subject of which seem to be the type that you wouldn't want to be congregating with, because again, they're of a felonious matter. It's the same thing, just in very different verbiage. And the reality of what we're looking at with this case, I am the biggest part of why I'm sick of talking about it is not even because I'd rather talk ball. It's because at this point we're talking about jabs. It's like if Max Kellerman were watching a huge boxing fight and all he's breaking down every single jab and missing like the actual power punches. There's been no power punches yet. We're just sitting here saying, man, great extension on that new jab. Oh, man, they countered that jab with a slight slip, a little bit of a shoulder roll as well. Look at that, man. What a time. What a time. And it's just like, okay, but Florida State definitely has a very strong argument in this particular segment that we're arguing, because they're right. We all know that they're right. The ACC knows that they're right. But like we've talked about on the show before, the goal of the ACC is not only to win, but it's also to drag this thing out as long as possible. Even if I lose, I'm going to lose this thing slowly and ploddingly and da-da-da-da. It's like when your mom says, come back in the house right now and go away. You got to leave your friends, but you don't jog back to the house. You take a real slow walk. Okay, I'm coming back. That type of deal.
Yeah, you outlined so the ACC's advantage in the way that this is all played out so far. Because remember, these lawsuits were filed in December. So the advantage for the ACC is this is all dragging out so slowly. The ACC would prefer this to take a long time. That's advantage ACC. But there's definitely an advantage Florida State that I see in all of this, Kenton, because the fact that we have dueling lawsuits going on in North Carolina and in Florida, we get to see some of the differences, not only in the state laws between the two states, because every state's a little different, but also the court procedures, right? So there's an appeal that's in process in North Carolina to the Carolina Supreme Court, and the business court judge there, Judge Bledsoe, has actually said, like, we're going to pause this case to see what the Supreme Court says. We're not going to move forward until that happens, right? Which seems good for Florida State. Whereas in Florida, even though there's an appeal happening, which is not to the state Supreme Court, but to that first court of appeals, the lower court Judge Cooper, is still moving forward. So and that's the friendlier venue to Florida State. So there are some things working in Florida State's favor, some things working in the ACC's favor. I like your Max Kellerman jab analogy because it's 100% spot on. In fact, they even bring this up in the Tallahassee Democrat article. They say the reply brings up the dueling cases in both North Carolina and Florida, with the school bringing up its appeal of the Mecklenburg County Business Court's decisions. In its filing, the school said that conflicting rulings between the two state courts are speculative at best and likely far away from being ruled. So they even admit here we're a long way away from a ruling, Kenton, and it seems like we're a long way away from any possible settlements. These two sides do not seem close enough yet to meet in the middle, because we don't know where the middle is right now.
Absolutely. Not only do we not know where the middle is, neither side has had their level of delusion or level of what is the reality tempered at all. Because like we talk about with how slowly this case is going, the other part of this case going slowly is also the fact that as the case goes on, as you go through discovery, as you hear different articles of evidence on this and that and the third, bit by bit, somebody's side starts to lose more battles and more battles and more battles. You may win some, you may lose some. You may win on this thing, lose on this thing. But then there come the big moments. Then there come the haymaker moments where it's like, oh no, this is a smoking gun to say, hey, did you sign this contract? And the judge is acknowledging, wait a minute, if you signed the contract, why did you sign and renew the contract? Or wait, where did this number to leave come from? Where is there any language in this contract that says that you have their TV rights until 2036? Is that in this contract specified anywhere? Those types of things are quite some ways off. And so with that in mind, like you talked about, there are wins by the ACC. There are wins by Florida State. I think the biggest win by Florida State so far is just the way and nature in which the Florida courts are working that you alluded to earlier. The way in which they're handling multiple things concurrently. It's like, hey, we'll handle your appeal while the case moves forward. As opposed to, like you said, North Carolina, it's like, hey, we're pausing until the appeal is finished. Until we know what the result of the appeal is, we are going to hit a hard pause, not a stop, but a hard pause on this. That's definitely advantage Florida State. Like you said, like we talked about on this show, and like is mentioned in this article, first in time, first in right. So Florida doing things concurrently moves them to that first in line in terms of first in time, which means they're first in right. So, this is, again, that's a win for Florida State. And, I don't want to say definitively, which I don't think we have. And if we have said this, I want to apologize for myself and Donno here, okay? Because we do not know the details of how this thing is going to shake out because we're so far from it. We're so far from the end. We're so far from discovery. We're so far from having the facts of the case laid out. Donno and I both know we have both been trying as hard as we can to get our eyes on the grant of rights. And the only thing we've seen, unless Donno has some inside information that he's hiding from his wonderful co-host here, the only thing we've seen is the terribly redacted one That's like it reads like a Snoop Dogg song that was censored for the radio in 2012 or something like that, where it's like one word and then 5 minutes of blank and then another word. It's really tough. So, this is a situation where everybody's speculating, everybody's throwing out their idea this way, that way, the third way. I am telling you right now, this case, if it was a baby, it wouldn't even have formed hard kneecaps yet. This is still very much so the infancy.
And to stick with your boxing analogy, I think Florida State has landed more jabs so far, but nobody's landed a haymaker. The haymakers in either direction are still to come. Florida State does appear on the list we're going to talk about when we come back. So does Miami, so does NC State, so does Georgia Tech. Top 10 non-conference football games on the ACC schedule this coming season. We're also going to talk a little NBA draft before we're done here. This is a loaded episode, and we're only getting started. You want to keep it locked right here on Locked On ACC. And I already know you're keeping it locked to the Game Time app. This is the only ticket app that Kenton and I use. We are getting the best deals, especially the best last-minute deals, whether it be Major League Baseball games. The summer is full of those. Concerts, musical theater. I'm down here in South Florida. The Copa America final is going to be here in a couple weeks in mid-July. There's tickets for that available. Folks, there is so much going on. You can get in on all the action at Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch with killer last-minute deals. All-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Folks, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute. You can save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats for you. They give you all-in pricing. They show you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. So Kenton, 24/7 Sports has published their top 10 non-conference games involving ACC teams this coming season. Remember, there are 17 teams now in the conference. So if you're like, wait, what is Cal doing? Cal is now in the ACC. So let me go through. Kenton, should I start from 10 and work the way up to number 1, or should I start from number 1 and work the old way down? What do you think?
We normally make them wait and anticipate, but today is a special day. Donno and I, we're going to start at 1 and give you 10 last. Let's do it.
I agree with that. So, and do you have any doubt about this? Now, the only doubt I would have is I don't think this game is going to be close. The significance is there. So, Chick-fil-A kickoff opening up the season. You're going to have the Clemson Tigers taking on the Georgia Bulldogs. Obviously, you would definitely say that just in terms of the prestige of both programs opening up, this is a huge game. I worry, and this is more about how good Georgia is than about anything we feel about Clemson. I don't know if this game's going to be close.
I mean this with all my heart and soul. If Clemson finds a way to win this game, this will be a bigger upset than Joe Namath and the Jets winning Super Bowl III. I mean that. Yeah. This will be a much bigger upset because this is the SEC versus ACC. The SEC's argument last year when the ACC had a winning record against them in the regular season, you didn't play our best. You didn't play our best. You're counting wins over Vanderbilt. You're counting wins over LSU. You're counting wins. If Clemson finds a way to beat Georgia, if they find a way to keep it close, I feel like that's a win for the ACC. Yeah. If they win it outright, oh man, you're never going to hear the end of it in terms of SEC. Matter of fact, we might go on Locked On SEC the following Monday. Hey, how you guys doing? Y'all all right? You okay? We'll just make sure you're okay. It was a tough weekend. It was a tough weekend for you down in Atlanta.
And so the game is going to be in Atlanta, which obviously is a lot closer to Athens than it is to Clemson, but it is technically a neutral site game, so that means like the Georgia season ticket holders don't have first dibs on tickets. I'm sure Clemson's
Yeah.
going to travel pretty well, but it's a lot closer to Georgia, so it's closer to a home game for them. And you don't, between two programs that are this relevant, opening game of the season, you don't usually see point spreads this high, Kenton, which outlines how I feel about the game. So Georgia right now are 13.5-point favorites. So they're 2 touchdown favorites. I think they probably win by more than that, but that's still a big line for a season opening game against two, theoretically powerhouse programs.
Absolutely. And the other thing about this is very interesting is Clemson has a returning trio that you don't often see that leads to a big line against them in game one, returning your head coach, your offensive coordinator, and your quarterback. And yet people still feel like, I'm not so sure. I'm not really big believing in this, which I understand that Georgia's returned those things as well. But you got to understand here, this is a perennial national powerhouse that is seeing a 2-touchdown spread against them despite returning those things. This is a abnormal situation, to say the least.
Now, going to number 2, I host Locked On Canes. I'm a University of Miami alumnus. I was a little surprised that Miami at Florida week 1 was this high on the list, all the way at number 2, because you consider, hey, Florida won 5 games last year. Miami won 7 games last year, but this is being billed as a really big game. But I get it, Kenton. I mean, obviously I'm into it, given I'll be at the game, covering Miami, but
of course,
the importance for both of these coaches, right? Because the seat can get warm or hot very quickly for Mario Cristobal or Billy Napier, whoever loses this game. Miami and Florida, bitter in-state rivals, but they don't actually play every year, so it's not something you always get to see. And winning this game for either team could potentially set the course for the rest of the season. So again, like two teams that one of them barely had a winning record last year, the other had a losing record. They rank this as the number 2 non-conference game involving ACC teams. Do you agree with that?
I feel like it's a little high. However, I do understand that there's a lot of different factors that play into why this is so high. You have the regional importance of recruiting in the state of Florida. Whichever team wins this game is likely to pick up some wins on the recruiting trail, unless the rest of their season just goes completely off the rails.
That's a great point.
You also have the reality that both of these coaches, like you said, their seats are at least warm. Neither one of these coaches can say, my seat is cold as ice. I'm a lifer here. They're going to build the crystal ball or the Napier statue outside of the stadium when I'm done. I know that for a fact. Neither one of these coaches have that. So you're looking at that situation where it's the impact of the recruiting, but also the impact of somebody may get on LinkedIn. Somebody may be an analyst at Bama next year. Somebody may be out of a job based on what happens here. So I get the importance of that in terms of how that would play into it. But in terms of entertainment value and like, hey, do you think this will be a really good game to watch? Not so sure.
Yeah, and so like I one of the reasons why, and again, I don't want the Locked On Canes viewers to get mad at me for saying that, why I was a little bit surprised that they ranked this one number 2 is you don't see that clear college football playoff implications on both sides. Now, I think Miami has the type of schedule where they could get into the top 12, and obviously winning that game would go a long way. But with Florida has the number 1 strength of schedule in the entire country. Like, it's going to be a gaunt. Like, I just don't see Florida as a realistic college football playoff candidate. So I think one of the criteria that I would use to evaluate these games is, do both teams have a legit shot at the CFP? I think Miami has a semi-legit shot. I don't think Florida does. So the number 3 game, Kenton, Florida State and Notre Dame. In South Bend, like both of those teams are projected on most people's top 12 at the end of the year. That's a gigantic game.
And that's why I said this one should have been number 2. This one should have jumped up in terms of the rankings, because not only is this a gigantic game in terms of the playoff implications, but this is also a gigantic game from the standpoint of we talk about coaching hot seats a lot. Norvell, his seat has cooled off significantly. Freeman, on the other hand, not so much. And so, you're looking at a situation where if Florida State goes into South Bend and embarrasses Notre Dame in front of touchdown Jesus, as they call him, that's not mine now. I'm not blaspheming here. That's what they call it. If that happens, you're going to be looking at a very deleterious situation for Freeman staff. But like you said, there is playoff implications on the line as well. There are very much so playoff implications on the line here because many people have seen both of these teams as potential playoff teams. A home loss to a team that has to travel basically across the entire country in one direction. They're going from one of the farthest south points in the country to basically middle America. That's tough to excuse that loss. It just is.
So number 4 is a game that is near and dear to Kenton's heart. This is going to be week 2. It's going to be in Charlotte between NC State of the ACC and Tennessee Volunteers team, which is getting quite a bit of hype heading into a difficult SEC schedule this year, Kenton. That's going to be this one. Tennessee, I would imagine, is probably going to be favored, but this one is probably easier to handicap than some of the other, or more difficult to handicap than some of the other games on the list, because this is really going to show people what NC State is all about very early in the year.
And the interesting thing is this also has that ACC versus SEC draw because these are two teams that are revered in being very much so in the same tiers of their conference. What do I mean by that? Both of these teams are heralded by many as dark horse candidates to win it all in their conference this year, or at least get to the game, at least be in a situation where they're in the conference championship game. So, this will go a long way. Again, there's not only playoff implications at play here, because if NC State can run the table or win out and win in Charlotte, even if they don't win out, you get a playoff bid, right? That's a very strong possibility for them. If you beat this Tennessee team, it opens you up to an at-large bid. If you beat Tennessee goes on for an amazing year. You end up one game short of the conference championship. The conference champ goes, and you don't go to the conference championship goes to the playoff. You don't go to the conference championship, but you have a win over an excellent Tennessee team. That puts you in position to potentially get into one of those at-large bids.
Let me run through the rest of the top 10, and you can tell me which of these games you like best. I'll do the same. So at number 5, they have Florida State versus Florida, which is it's almost the last game of the season for both teams. So you never know. Like if Billy Napier still has a job, that's a huge one for him. That could maybe decide whether Florida State gets into or at least a higher seed in the CFP. They could still potentially play for the ACC championship after that. That's not a conference game, but it is a big game. Number 6, you've got Clemson versus South Carolina, in-state rivalry last weekend of the year. Louisville at Kentucky. I'll tell you, Kentucky has had Louisville's number. And it doesn't seem to matter. No matter how, and Kentucky obviously has had some good years, no matter how good Louisville is or how bad Kentucky is or vice versa, Kentucky always seems to win that game like they did last year. You got Cal against Auburn at number 8. Remember, Cal almost beat Auburn in California last year. They'll have to go to Jordan-Hare Stadium this year. At number 9, you've got Louisville at Notre Dame. Number 10, you've got Georgia Tech at Georgia. I know that one. You could be that could be a 5 or 6 touchdown difference at the end.
Yeah. My favorite out of that group is definitely Louisville, Notre Dame, because that is, people are talking about Brown potentially having a breakout year or getting back to the ACC championship. That game is going to go a long way in showing who you are. That game is going to go a long way in showing, hey, are you a serious operation or not? Because objectively speaking, Notre Dame is loaded with talent up front, like always. Offensive line talent is just what they do, and they have one of the better secondaries in the entire nation. That defense overall, for whatever reason, Notre Dame has struggled to make edge rushers, and now all of a sudden they got a couple of those as well, which really adds a factor to that defense that they haven't had in years. You bring that to a Louisville team that, again, is Brown. I don't know what it is about Brahms, but when they step into Louisville, they all of a sudden get all these rating boosts out the world to make themselves and their teams play exponentially better. And you talk about what they do at Louisville and who that team is. They have an offensive identity because of Brown, but make no bones about it. Their defense is one of the more quiet kept secrets in America. They have a defensive unit that, again, from front to the back, from your front 7 to the back end, they have experienced players everywhere. They have players that make big plays everywhere. And they have my potential ACC Defensive Player of the Year in Ashton Gelati as well. I think that team could do some special things in that game against Notre Dame, and I think that game could be very impactful for both of their playoff hopes.
Had the first round of the NBA draft last night. How surprised should we be that Kyle Filipowski of Duke was not drafted. You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. All right, so 4 players who played in the ACC last year got drafted in the first round. I made that distinction because a player from Cal did get drafted, but like they weren't in the ACC last year.
Right,
So can't really take credit for that one, right? So congratulations to Bub Carrington from Pitt, who got drafted 14th to the Trailblazers. Jared McCain of Duke gets drafted 16th. He's a 76er now. You had my guy Keyshawn George out of Miami, who got drafted by the Knicks, but traded. The pick was traded to the Wizards, and you had Ryan Dunn from UVA, who gets drafted 28th. So someone who not on that list, Kenton, who I expected to be a first-round pick. You did have one Duke player drafted, but it wasn't Kyle Filipowski, who I thought would be drafted in the teens or the 20s at the very latest. He is considered to be the top player left on the board heading into the second round. But what do you think it was about Philip? Is it physicality or lack thereof? Like, why do you think he wasn't drafted last night?
The pendulum isn't swinging back to the traditional big man. It's swinging to something new. It's not the three and the guy who shoots a lot of threes, has a lot of skill and all that, but it's not necessarily the most physical guy. They're starting to get phased out. They're starting to get, you have to bring that physicality with you. You have to make that happen, because we've seen from multiple guys, hey, this guy just ain't physical enough to get it done. This guy just ain't fleet of foot enough to get it done. A lot of the centers now that you look at, they may not, the other part of that physicality or lack thereof thing, if you're not particularly physical, what you need to do is you need to be extremely versatile in switching situations. You don't think about that with Kyle Filipowski. You don't think of him as a guy that's like, oh man, if we have him on the perimeter with a 2-guard, I think that he can consistently give us enough. Not saying that he needs to be Rudy Gobert or Victor Wembanyama and teams need to be terrified regardless of who he's checking. Not saying that you need to be that, but you just need to give us some juice, some stops, the occasional stop. And that, if that's the case, I don't really see how Filipowski stops guys from turning the corner. I just don't see it realistically at the NBA level. So I get that. I understand that. And the last thing I'll say is this. In some of the biggest moments, he shrank. When he had opportunities to show against Armando Bacot, I'm the big dog on the block, he shrank. When he had opportunities against DJ Burns late in the season, multiple times in tournaments, the ACC tournament, then the NCAA tournament in the Elite Eight, to show, I'm the guy, I'm the bully. Stop talking about this pudgy guy from Raleigh. It's me. I'm the best big in the triangle. He didn't show up. He did not do enough to get his team wins. Not only did he not do enough to get his team wins, in those 4 games, I wouldn't say that he particularly showed up well enough to say, he did more than hold his own. Because if you're talking about a first-round draft pick, you don't want to hear he held his own against 2 guys that are very likely going to be in Lithuania next year. That's not what you want to hear. So I get it. I get why he didn't go in the first round, but make no bones about it. That's not me castigating him as a player, saying there's no future in the NBA for Kyle, because I think there is. I really do. If he focuses in and hunkers down on lateral movement, I think he'll be just fine.
Yeah, honestly, you don't often say this about the NBA draft, but the second round may be spicier than the first round in some ways, because Bronny's still on the board. Right. And you figure he's probably going to be a Laker. Can they get him at 55, or do they have to trade up to get him? So it's not even just the Filipowski angle tonight. It's the Bronny James angle. So I might be more excited for the second round than I was for the first.
Let me tell you something. The NBA draft, for all that they do with their coverage and whatnot in terms of ESPN and all that cast of characters, I'm not surprised that the second round is going to be more spicy, because Bronny James is primetime TV with just the name recognition alone. But again, us two as ACC guys, who was the bigger draw to the ACC last year, Carrington or Filipowski? And yet, who's still on the board? You see what I'm saying? Right. So there's multiple situations where the NBA is becoming so much about projection and what you could do at the NBA level, and it's becoming such a different game from the college game that we're seeing an almost inverse effect, where guys like Luka Garza, guys like Kyle Filipowski and whatnot, who excel in many ways. Armando Bacot being another one, DJ Burns being another one. All these guys who excelled at the college level, their games may not translate to what the new NBA is about, even though they had major success in college.
Okay, well, good one today as always. We appreciate everyone for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like button if you're watching on our YouTube channel. If you're listening to the audio version, take us with you wherever you go, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and there's like 100 podcast apps. We're on all of them, man. Find us there, Locked On ACC. We'll talk to you again next time right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.